Giving service to our community, Vision Radio 345. Awesome in music, great in talk.
Okay, welcome to the show. It's Mr. Kane on Vision Radio 345. I don't usually do chat shows, but I decided to do one today. I've got my special guests with me, Ian Rose and Kendra and Chantel. Chantel, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hiya, my name is Chantel. I previously used to work as a probation officer, but then I didn't left, and I'm now working in a school within admin.
Great stuff. And Kendra?
Hi, my name's Kendra. I currently work as a school admin at a secondary school. However, I have a background in book selling and content writing as well.
Very interesting. Great stuff. And Mr. Rose?
Yeah, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name's Ian Rose, and I currently work as an employment advisor, but I also help people to kind of overcome barriers that they have that might stop them from working. So it could be emotional, it could be physical barriers, illnesses. But I've also worked in the community for many years and with young people, older people, helping them to overcome certain traumas.
Okay, thank you. Just before we start, if you want to leave a message, please leave a message on info@visionradio345.co.uk or just drop a message in the box below. Right, so as I said, today we're going to talk about trauma and how it's actually affected young people also in some stages, right into adulthood. I'll start off with Chantel first. As you've been a probation officer, I'm pretty sure you've come across a lot of these incidents with clients that you've dealt with over the period of time you was in that employment. Could you share some of those issues with us that you've experienced, but some of those issues that they've actually explained to you or expressed to you?
Yeah. So with a lot of people that were using the service, I've seen a lot of them were either troubled due to their family background and the trauma that they faced as a kid, which then led them to a lot of drug influence. A lot of the people that I would see at probation, 9 times out of 10 were all using some sort of substance,
right,
to cope with the existing, trauma that they were facing as they were a kid.
Wow. So is it always that situation, or is it a number of things? Like we said, it could be parenting also causes trauma. Some of the behaviors that it starts from somewhere, doesn't it? So do you find that a lot of it starts from the home and then it leads to, like you said, drug addiction and other ways of trying to cope with trauma?
Yeah, I feel like that is something that you see a lot, and as I said again, it can be a lot of things that obviously have an effect or as a reason as to why things happen. But I feel like it all stems from obviously at home, whether it's that they were getting neglected or they were getting neglected, or it was a thing where it was like they were getting abused or something. It seems to stem from where the family home was.
Yeah.
Or some of them never grew up with a family.
Okay, that's a very valid point. Kendra, what's your take on that, please?
No, I definitely agree with Chantel, and I forgot to mention earlier that I did work in a hospital, not for very long, and it was mostly with patients who had, mental health issues or physical health like anorexia, and a lot of it did stem from having weaker family ties, and just weaker family relationships. So I definitely think that when someone is struggling into adulthood is because a lot of times they just don't have that, that strong, solid foundation of family. And if you look at even a lot of homeless people, the reason why they are homeless is because of lack of relationships and lack of love and solidarity from our loved ones. So I definitely think having that family ties as a foundation is so important
absolutely
for all of us.
Yeah. And Ian, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I just want to echo what everybody said, really. And I think with anyone, whether they're young people or they're older people, all of these things that kind of manifest themselves in later years, they all start from, I would say, from formative years, from childhood, coming on up. And I think it is that where you grew up, your environment that you grew up in, shapes you for the future. So, the kind of old adage, psychology adage is that everything can thrive in the right environment. And the opposite of that is true. So things aren't in the right environment, they're not going to thrive. And it doesn't matter what it is. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just want to read something that I've got here. I've been doing some research and some paragraphs and stuff that I've been going through. But this is something that I caught up on. It says, therefore, it is important to recognize the signs of trauma in children in the weeks and months following a traumatic event so that early intervention can help minimize and prevent long-term consequences. And as I mentioned, when you don't have the intervention, which you're right, because it comes from definitely the home, if those things are not happening at home, then they lead into serious long-term consequences, which we see now in some grown adults. And that could be from, we're adults from, as they say, from 18 plus, but we're talking about before that. The trauma can happen way before that, unknowingly, because some of our parents just, they just tell us what to do and they do things that they don't think there's going to be no effect. And we see this happening now further down the line with adults. So as we're coming to adults now and people with trauma, how do we actually untangle that? Because we recognize that the trauma is there. And it's a lot to unpack when that person is in that state of mind. So, Chantal, what strategies do you think we could use to unwire the trauma? Although you can't unwire it completely, but what tactics and strategic measures that you would take as a probation officer to go through that with an individual?
I think I would say that the first thing is obviously when you're doing an intervention, you've got to kind of tackle the root cause. I think the first thing is also being able to admit where you feel like the trauma is, because a lot of us are in denial and we can't expect anything to work or receive any help if we cannot admit or be able to face the trauma head on. So I think the first step in doing anything is just being able to say it out loud, because sometimes you can say something that deep down is true, but because you're so in denial and you don't want other people to know, you don't voice out, the problems that you're facing, but you instead internalize that.
Right. Okay.
So I think, that would be the first step to, trying to, just even see how deep it's rooted and how bad the trauma is before being able to, really say what strategies I would then be able to take next, depending on obviously how aware and how, able this person is able to, because be able to admit.
Yeah, because they've got to actually come to that point where they can actually be free to talk about it without being condemned by anybody and just go through that process.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's even like when you think about it as well, when anybody that goes to rehab or has to go to AA meetings or whatever, the first thing that they always tell them is that they need to, introduce themselves, meaning not just introduce yourself in using a persona that you have been telling everyone your whole life, but the real you, whereas you admit that you are, either a drug addict or you are an alcoholic or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a very good point. Kendra, what's your take on that?
I think that when an adult is still dealing with the after effects of childhood trauma, their body is still remembering that, like the nervous system is still in a state of survival, like fight or flight. So, I mean, the first thing that would come to mind to me is therapy and just, having them understand that even though they were stuck in an unsafe environment in the past, that's not where they are at now, that they're now safe and that, they can, maybe even try and relieve that memory in a safe environment so that they understand that, they're no longer a victim and that they do have power now. Just empowering them, so that they know that they don't have to, be in that state anymore.
Okay, great answer. Mr. Rose?
Yeah, I think that's kind of spot on. And a lot of the times when individuals present, if they start to present in kind of at the teenage stage, or maybe just before then, or just after then, what we tend to get from practitioners is they treat the signs and symptoms, but as a young lady said earlier on, they don't go to the root cause, and that's because there's something called a triangle of diagnosis.
Right.
And the triangle of diagnosis says that in order to effect a diagnosis, there are three elements that you have to have. One is the signs, one is the symptoms, and the other one is the history. Now,
Right.
if somebody came to me and said, or a doctor came to the doctor and said, Doctor, I've been vomiting all day. I've got a headache. And the doctor said, okay, I can see that you look sick. That's signs and symptoms. And the doctor could say, well, I'm going to write you a prescription, but it sounds like you've got a virus. So I'm going to write you a prescription for this particular medication. Now, there's one important ingredient that was left out, and that was the history. So if the person had said, oh, no, but 10 hours earlier or the night before, I took some Class A drugs, then what would happen? The diagnosis would change. Therefore, the remedy or the medicine or the prescription that the doctor would have written would have changed as well. And a lot of the times, a lot of practitioners, they treat the signs and symptoms, but they forget the third element of diagnosis, which is the history. And in some cases, you've got people that are presenting that look like they've got ADHD, but it's really trauma. And they're moving out of trauma. When individuals move out of trauma, it is about fight or flight. And sometimes when they've grown up with trauma, when some of us may have done, I grew up with a lot of trauma, but you either turn that on yourself or turn it on other people. Right. And it's quite true that hurt people, whether it's themselves or other people. But one of the things that we're not good at doing is getting individuals to see, first of all, this is the cause. And then in answer to your question, the treatment itself should be made in accordance to what the diagnosis is. And a lot of the times, a lot of practitioners miss that. And we end up treating the signs and symptoms, and that kind of prolongs into adulthood and other things and things like that. But it's very important that we look at that third element of the diagnosis triangle.
Okay, is that something that the panel can agree on, or we can agree on that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think we definitely agree on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to read something about emotional signs of trauma. So this says a child with trauma usually has trouble identifying, expressing, and managing their emotions. Sometimes they internalize their feelings and have limited language in their emotional state. When reacting to stress, they may respond strongly and unpredictably and have difficulty de-escalating their heightening emotions. Some children may become emotionally numb to dangerous situations, which can cause them to be vulnerable to re-traumatization. Chantal, your take on that?
I would say that that's actually true, because even obviously every when you go into schools, if you've noticed, there's a lot of kids that we would label as they're just bad or they're just naughty or whatever. But what we tend to find is that those are the ones that actually have trauma. Whereas from obviously an outsider looking in, we might not see that as that, and they probably don't know it as well. But our body has a way, as well as our mind has a way of dealing with certain traumas and things that happen, where a lot of the time we tend to, because obviously we don't know how to deal with the emotion that we're feeling, or the feelings that we're feeling inside, we tend to either act out, whether that's in a positive way. Some people become hypersexual. Some people, decide to just become unruly. It's just, I guess, it's our body's way of, just dealing with
it.
Traumas.
Yeah, because it's a coping
Exactly.
mechanism which you don't have, and it's a skill you haven't learned, and that does actually. As I mentioned about the emotional signs of trauma, that when I read that verse, some children may become emotionally numb and dangerous situations, which cause them to be vulnerable and to be vulnerable to re-traumatization. I'm going to play a clip. And this child was explaining how she felt about how some of our parents deal with us. So have a listen to this clip, and then we're going to go back into the conversation.
They like, you can't talk to them. You go to somebody else to talk to, and that's not who you want us to talk to. How am I supposed to come and talk to you, and you don't listen to me, but somebody else may listen to me, but they not gonna treat me how you want me to be treated? You love me, but you don't show it. But they don't love me, but they act like they love me. So I'm going to go to the person that acts like they love me, and not the person who. I'm going to go to the person who acts like they love me, because when you grow up like this, and you grow up with people who emotionally stunt your growth, you go looking for other people and you insecure. You go looking for other people for sex, for people who gonna tell you, oh, you're pretty. That's why the first person to tell you you're pretty, I'm glad my mama never. They say your parent and your family is your first bully, point out every insecurity you have, and then you want your kids to feel beautiful and smart and go to school with people who telling them the same thing you tell them. That's not gonna work. You can't want to be your children's love and shelter, but you're not that. But that's materialistic things. If God was only materialistic to you, you will feel hurt. You need to.
Right. So you kind of heard what happened, what that child was saying. And there were quite a few things she pointed out there. Is there anything you want to express on that from what you just heard? And
Sorry, Eden, I don't know if it was just me, but I didn't hear the audio that well.
Yeah, the audio was a lot low.
Yeah.
It kind of started and it cut after about 20 seconds.
Okay, so what she was saying is that when going to her parents to talk about certain things, and that could be anything, because you want to be feeling comfortable to go and talk to your parents about something, they actually shut you down, and then you end up going outside of your home to somebody else to go and confide in them. And then when that goes wrong, that now starts a rollerball of a number of things. Do we agree on that, or we don't?
Yeah, I would agree on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I feel like teenagers as a whole, they're just a group of people that aren't really taking that seriously. And a lot of times when they do try and express themselves, parent can kind of shut them down. And as a result, they end up, going to a different group of people that maybe doesn't have their best interest in mind. And then, they go downhill from there. But I definitely think that, like, teenagers, they're just not really, a lot of times they're not really rated by adults.
Mm-hmm. And your take on that, yeah?
Yeah, I think that's also true. I think it can be. You see things like that happening all the time, where parents don't necessarily take the teenagers, and sometimes it's because they haven't got the capacity to take it on themselves.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times we assume that because they're parents, they have that equipment, and most of them are ill-equipped. A lot of parents are ill-equipped to deal with these things because it might be generational, it might be their own traumas that they've not dealt with in the past, but they're just not as equipped to deal with it as we might think. And we sometimes ask them for things that they haven't got the equipment to deal with.
Great answer. Chantel, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree on that. I think, as you were saying before, like, a lot of the time, when you're not getting it within the household, you then tend to go out of the household. And I think, as you were saying, that kind of then can lead into things like TV, because of the fact that they fall in love with their predator, and because they then create a trauma bond, a lot of the times they then are blinded by, how this person is treating them, because of the fact that they think it's for them as an escape for them to, run away from the trauma that they was experiencing as a child. And they think, oh, because obviously I'm in a different situation and I'm blinded by this person that's basically saved me.
Yeah.
They then, choose to turn a blind eye, or sometimes they are just not able to see that this is not actually dealing with what's, the deeper cause, is actually making it worse, if anything.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, actually. So now we've identified those areas. we have to go back to the home, like we mentioned in the early part of the conversation, because, like you said, Chantel, some of our parents themselves have not dealt with trauma, and when they haven't dealt with their own trauma, obviously that spills over to their children, etc., etc. So when they don't deal with their own trauma, which is the main root of the problem, because if they deal with that, then obviously we wouldn't have such an impact. And talking about parents, let's go back to that slightly, because how about parents? What do we do with that one then? If the parents, when you approach your parents, because you obviously, you know, they're your parents, they love you regardless how bad you may think they are, they do love you. But you can, those conversations, like we just said about trauma, could we have those conversations with our parents or not? Or do you think that that's a bad idea?
I think it's kind of difficult because a lot of our parents, especially if you have African or Caribbean parents, a lot of them don't even recognize that they have trauma. They kind of just grew up in an environment where, you know, certain things were normalized.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to tell someone to deal with the trauma when they don't even recognize that they have it. So that's kind of been, you know, the experience of myself and just people that I know.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Yeah, because you would think by the time you get to mid-adult age, you're in your 20s, touching 30s, so forth, you could probably have a mature conversation with your parents about that. And like you said, Kendra, some parents, even up to today, you know, in their age, still don't want to address that, but still want great outcomes for them, for their children, which just doesn't make sense. Ian, your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, being a parent myself, and also parented a parent of a young child, a parent of child that's done the kind of two grown-up children, I would say. I think I come from a generation, and I was also not born in this country, so there were cultural norms that come into play, where I've had to relearn my parenting. I've had to relearn some of the things that because I'm an old fuddy-duddy, I'm an old-fashioned guy, and I deal with things in an old school way. But I've learned over the years to talk to my children, and also for them to talk to me. I don't want my child to not be able to talk to me because I couldn't talk to my parents.
Yeah.
And also, for us, the belt or chastisement, heavy chastisement, was the remedy for everything. It was a remedy for all things, and children in my day should be seen and not heard. So I've had to relearn my skills as a parent, but I don't. One thing I will not do, and I haven't done, is to go so far the other way that I've forgotten all of the old values. And a lot of parenting now seems to consist of there's no children. Children want rights, but they must understand that where there's rights, there's responsibilities.
That's correct.
And they want the right without the responsibility, and that's a dangerous thing. And that's what we're seeing. I've never ever seen a generation where parents are frightened for their children until now.
Wow. That
would be unheard of in my day. Unheard of. It wouldn't even be a question. It was always the other way around.
Yeah.
I don't think a healthy fear and respect is good, but we've been given the task to bring our children up in the right way until they reach to adulthood. That's just how it was ordained. And I think we've come to it because I travel a lot, and I as I said, in my work, I deal with older people, young people. I deal with people that are in gangs, people that aren't even allowed to come into my building, and they have to look over their shoulders when they come into my building, and they've been shot, umpteen times, stabbed umpteen times, and a lot of the times, and you know this from some of the work that we've done, when they were surveyed, they actually said, when the question was put to them, what could have stopped you from being the way you are now and getting into trouble? The majority of them said, if our parents was more strict. If our parents was more strict. And I think that's a damning indictment of parenting, because we've gone so far the other way. We've gone so far from the values that we had, because we especially our generation, we felt that our parents traumatized us with their parenting. So we've gone so far the other way, and that hasn't worked either. And we've kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and these things have to be addressed, because children, there are some people that come and they present with layers and layers and layers and layers of trauma. Someone might have a specific incident where they might have had domestic violence, or they might be the victim of a sexual assault or a sexual abuse. That is a single incident that might have traumatized them. But where you see multiple incidents and acts of trauma in the home and outside the home, that becomes compacted and that becomes buried sometimes. And when they get into young adulthood, it starts to manifest itself. And that is hard to that is hard to deal with. It's hard to unpack, because you're not dealing with a single source that they can say, this is the case. You're dealing with multiple layers, and it's multifaceted.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Chantal mentioned. It is actually layers of things that happen over a long period of time. But I feel this. I mean, from what I'm getting from the panel and you guys, which is really interesting. I really do think this, because sometimes when you're growing up, you actually think that you are the actual problem, that it's actually your fault. Yeah. And it's actually not your fault. And this is where we have to try now and soften our heart and just forgive your parents for what they've done, because it's not actually your fault. And that can be very difficult to do, because when you think and you rewind the tape and you think of all the horrible things they've done and all this, the stuff that just wasn't right when you went to talk to them, they just tell you to go and sit down in a while, nothing, whatever it was. Yeah. When you get to an age where you can kind of understand yourself, and that's difficult, because when you've got trauma going on at the same time, you're trying to navigate yourself through life. But there are black holes there what need to be sorted out, issues that concern you, which you haven't addressed. And I just think that the best way, this is just me, I'm just saying that the best way is, once you forgive them, which can be difficult to do, you have some sign of relief, because you can sit down and have these conversations with them and still walking away, still feeling hard-hearted. Does that make any sense? I mean, what's your take on that, Kendra?
I feel like this is one of those things that's easier said than done if there was a lot of abuse and violence, going on in childhood. Yeah. You know what they say, forgive so that you can move on yourself. But when you're fully traumatized from childhood and you have a set of parents that don't really want to take responsibility for what they've done, a lot of times they even say that they forgot, or that they don't ever remember that happening, which is,
yeah, that's reality. No, that is real. Yeah, sometimes
that happens a lot.
Oh my God. When you ask them, do you remember this? And to tell you, no, I don't remember. All of a sudden,
they don't know.
Selective memory, they call it, selective memory. They remember what they want to remember and leave the rest behind. But that's the thing that Chantal was saying about denial. When they deny that there is a problem and they don't address it, and they put it to one side. Yeah, so as we were saying, when our parents, they don't, forgiveness was the thing I was getting to, when, we must learn to forgive. And as Kendra was saying, that sometimes they just they've got selective memory. They don't want to really listen to anything that anybody has to say. And that, again, can cause long-term problems, because now you're going to walk away with the problems still unsolved, and you carry that on until they actually approach you, or you approach them, and try to sit down and work that out. Mr. Rose, your response to that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I mean, and it's also been my experience. I mean, where I've gone back years later and I've said, well, this happened, that happened. Suddenly they get selected memory. Suddenly they get amnesia, selected amnesia. And it's always a denial. And there's always an unwillingness to face what actually happened. But I think forgiveness plays such a big part, and I can only tell my own story as my journey when I came to this country like 50-something years ago. And and how I was growing up on the streets of East London, and I was angry. I was really angry. First of all, I didn't want to come here, and when I came here, I rebelled. And I was getting into trouble. I was getting into trouble almost on a daily basis, and sometimes it led me into court, where I was doing things not necessarily that were that. The only criminal activity I did was I love to fight. I was always fighting,
Right.
and but I was also hurt and angry and upset.
Yeah.
And it's only when I reached to a certain age and I started to see the problems that this could bring me, and then I realized that I didn't want to be this way. I didn't want to be going to prison for committing offences against people. And I actually, what healed me, and as you said, Mr. Kane, forgiveness is a very big part. I'm a Christian, yeah. So with Christ, in letting Christ into my life, that healed me, and it taught me forgiveness of myself and forgiveness of the people around me. And Nelson Mandela had a famous quote, and when he came out of prison after so many years, and they said to him, "How could you forgive these people? How could you let these people in? They've taken the best of your years of your life.
Yeah.
Your eyesight's fading." And he said to them, "If I'd carry all of that hurt, all of that bitterness, and all of these things," he actually said, "it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die."
Wow.
And that is so profound. And that's what carrying all of these things does. So it's not hurting you or the abuser. Sorry, it's not hurting the abuser, it's actually hurting you. All of these things, because the abuser might just go to their bed and sleep okay. They're not, but you have to learn to forgive. You have to learn to forgive and have to learn to let go. And that's one of the things that letting Christ into my life has allowed me to do, is to forgive myself, forgive other people.
Wow. Chantel, your take on that before we come to a close?
Yeah, I was going to actually just say that, I feel like a lot of people that obviously go through trauma, the reason why they don't sometimes want to hold on to it is because they feel like when everyone talks about, forgive.
Yeah.
But what people, don't realize is that, yeah, you can forgive someone, but it doesn't mean you have to forget. You have to, like, when you're forgiving somebody, or especially, when you're forgiving somebody, what you're really doing is you're forgiving yourself, because yes, what they did was not right, and it's not to say what they did is right, and that's why you're now forgiving. But what you're doing is you're essentially allowing yourself to be able to process what's happened. And now that you've processed what's happened, you're going to deal with it, which is why when you say you forgive somebody, it's realistically just you mirroring yourself and actually forgiving yourself internally. Because what we tend to then do is obviously self-destruct. And that's where, we either go down a path of drugs or path of rebellion and all those type of things, because of the fact that we've internalized the trauma and haven't been able to, forgive ourselves, and then we start ending up beating ourselves up for it.
Right, and that's what actually happens, as you rightly said. That's why it's important to try to get to that point. And I know it's very difficult because everybody's different. Some people it may take, a couple of weeks. Some people it takes a long period of time for them to come to that stage to think to themselves, you know what, I'm beating myself up. I'm not getting nowhere with this. So the best thing for me to do is let it go. And like you said, Chantal, everybody's different, and everybody will deal with things differently when it comes to those aspects of trauma. Kendra, your take on that, please.
Yeah, I mean, as mixed and complex my feelings are about, forgiveness, I think that at the end of the day, you should do what you need to do to feel best within your body, within your mind. And I think what forgiveness allows is that it kind of gives you a little bit of distance and separation from the things that happened in the past, because I know when I get really angry and emotional about something that happened to me in the past, it's like I'm reliving it in that moment all over again, because all of the feelings come back, all of the memories come back. And it's kind of like I'm going back to what happened, and I'm living it again and again and again. And I think what forgiveness does, it gives you distance from that. It gives you peace from that. And at the end of the day, that's what's most important, feeling at peace with yourself and with your life so that you can carry on moving forward.
Exactly. I'd just like to thank you all for joining me on this show. I found it very interesting to listen to all your views and comments. Chantal, thank you for coming on. Kendra, thank you. Mr. Rose, thank you for coming on too. This is Vision Radio 345. Please leave your comments. Drop an email at info@visionradio345.co.uk, or you can just drop a message just below under the program. Thank you all for joining me, and that's it from me, and take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
So that's it. A great topic. I'm going to actually do a part 2 on this, because I think there's so many things that was happening during that conversation. We're going to extract some other things from it and just continue the conversation. So stay tuned to Vision Radio 345. It's Mr. Kane in conversation on trauma, a serious thing that we look at, because as I said, there are people who are still walking around with trauma and haven't dealt with it. But I do say this, the first part of it is to forgive. I know it's very difficult to do, but we have to do something about it to protect ourselves and our mind and our spirit, so we can have some sense of peace. I'm out of here till next time. Take care and be blessed.
This is Vision Radio 345. Best in music, awesome in talk, serving our community. This is Vision Radio 345.